Alright, everyone, this week we are doing something a little different from the past few weeks. We are getting into the infrastructure side of academic librarianship, the actual systems and platforms that make everything we have talked about possible. Reference, collections, instruction, all of that runs on top of some kind of technology, and this week is where we open that up. Now, I want to be upfront. This is not a technology course, and I am not expecting you to come out of this week knowing how to configure a library system. What I do expect is that you will be able to hold a professional conversation about these systems, ask smart questions, and understand enough to participate in decisions at your institution. So let's get into it. Here are the 5 things I want you to be able to do by the end of this week. Let me walk through them quickly because they actually tell a story if you read them in order. We start with distinguishing between ILS and LSP. That's the big structural shift in the field right now, so we need to understand what those terms mean and why one has been replacing the other. Then we move into discovery systems, the thing your users actually interact with when they search the library. Understanding what is happening under the hood there matters a lot for user experience. The third objective is about the core modules: acquisitions, cataloging, ERM, circulation. These are the working parts of any library platform, and you will encounter them regardless of which system your library uses. Fourth, interoperability. How do these systems talk to each other? That is where standards and APIs come in. And finally, evaluation. This is probably the most practically useful one. At some point in your career, you may be part of a team selecting or migrating to a new system, and you want to know how to approach that decision well. Okay, before we get into specific products and vendors, I want you to have a mental model of the whole ecosystem because it is easy to get lost in the names. Think of a library's technology as 4 zones. First is resource management. This is the back end where staff work, acquiring materials, cataloging them, tracking serials, managing licenses. It's invisible to most users, but it's where a huge amount of librarian labor happens. Second is user-facing services, the discovery layer, the catalog, circulation, interlibrary loan. This is what your patrons actually see and touch. Third is the integration layer. Libraries do not run on one system, they run on several, and those systems need to communicate. That is where standards and AP is live. And fourth is analytics. Libraries have to demonstrate value, justify budgets, and make data-informed decisions. Usage statistics, assessment dashboards, counter reports, all of that falls here. Here is the key insight. These 4 zones are interconnected. A decision you make in resource management, say canceling a database subscription, ripples into discovery, into usage data, and into what users can access. You cannot manage one zone in isolation. This slide is probably the most important conceptual one of the week, so stay with me. An integrated library system, ILS, was the dominant model for decades. It was built primarily around print. You catalog a book, you circulate it, you track who has it. It was modular but kind of siloed. Cataloging talked to circulation, but the whole system was built with a print-first assumption baked in. Here's the problem. Libraries do not run on print anymore. A typical academic library today might spend 60 or 70% of its materials budget on electronic resources, journals, databases, ebooks, streaming content. The old ILS was never designed to manage that gracefully. So the industry started building a new generation of platforms, library services platforms, or LSPs. The difference is not just that they handle e-resources better. It's a whole different architecture, cloud-native, unified data model, designed from the ground up to manage print and electronic together without the workarounds. Breeding's 2024 Library Systems Report, your first reading this week, maps exactly which institutions are on which kind of system, and the trajectory is clear. The market is moving toward LSPs. That does not mean every library has made the jump, especially smaller institutions with limited budgets, but that is the direction. So when you are job searching and you see experience with Alma or familiarity with Folio Preferred, that is what they are talking about. Alright, names and faces time. This table gives you a snapshot of who the major players are right now. Ex Libris Alma is the dominant LSP in the academic library market globally. If you end up working at a mid to large university, there is a good chance you are working with Alma and its discovery layer, Primo. Ex Libris is now owned by Clarivate, same company that owns Web of Science. So there are some interesting dynamics there around data and consolidation. OCLC WorldShare is the other major LSP player, and it has a unique advantage. It is deeply integrated with WorldCat, which is the world's largest bibliographic catalog. If cooperative cataloging and resource sharing are a priority, that integration matters a lot. Folio is the interesting one. It is open source, built by a community of libraries and vendors through something called the Open Library Environment. It is newer and still maturing, but several major institutions have adopted it. Think of it as the community-driven alternative to the big commercial platforms. Koha has been around since 1999 and is the most widely installed library system in the world by raw numbers, mostly because smaller libraries love it and it has a huge global community. It is technically an ILS, not an LSP, but a very capable one. Bookmark librarytechnology.org, that is Marshall Breeding's site, and it is your go-to resource for tracking who uses what, vendor histories, and market trends. It is free and incredibly detailed. Let's talk about discovery systems because this is where your users live. Think about the last time you searched for something in a library database. The interface you used, that single search box that pulls from books, articles, databases all at once, that is a discovery system. It replaced the old OPAC, which was basically just a catalog of what the library physically owned. The idea behind discovery systems was compelling. Give users a Google-style experience that searches across everything the library has access to, not just the physical collection. One box, one search. The reality is more complicated. These systems all rely on what is called a central index, a massive pre-built index of content that the vendor has aggregated. The scope and quality of that index varies significantly between products. Ex Libris Primo uses the Central Discovery Index, which covers over 1 billion records. EDS from EBSCO is particularly strong on journal content. WorldCat Discovery leans into the cooperative cataloging network. Here is the thing I want you to think critically about. These indexes are not neutral. Which content is included, how relevance is ranked, whether the vendor has financial relationships with certain publishers, all of that shapes what surfaces at the top of a search result. Reading 4 this week, the Dula and Morris article gets into vendor transparency and why this matters. From a user experience perspective, your job as a librarian is to understand the limitations of your discovery system and communicate them to users. No discovery system covers everything. Electronic resource management might sound dry, but I promise it is one of the most practically important areas of academic librarianship right now, and one of the most complex. Think about what it takes to provide access to a single journal package. You negotiate a license with a vendor. The license has terms. Who can access it? From where? For what purposes? What happens to your perpetual access rights if you cancel? You acquire it, you activate it in your system, so it appears in your discovery layer. You track usage to know whether it is being used. And then, at renewal time, you weigh that usage data against cost per use against your budget and make a decision. That whole workflow, from license negotiation through cancellation or renewal, is the ERM lifecycle on this slide. 2 standards you should know: Counter and Sushi. Counter is the standard for how usage statistics are reported by vendors. It gives you consistent, comparable data across all your e-resource subscriptions. Sushi is the protocol that automates collecting those statistics. Instead of logging into every vendor portal to download spreadsheets, your system can pull the data automatically. This matters because without good usage data, you are making collection decisions blind. And at most academic libraries, the e-resources budget is the biggest line item. Getting this right is not optional. I want to spend a little time on open source because it comes up a lot and there are some real misconceptions about it. The biggest misconception is that open source means free. It means free to license. The code is openly available and you can use it without paying a licensing fee. But running an open source system is absolutely not free. You need staff with technical skills to configure and maintain it, or you pay a third-party vendor like Bywater Solutions or Equinox to host and support it. You need to budget for training. When something breaks, you are not calling a help desk. You are posting to a community forum or filing a ticket with your support provider. Koha is the workhorse of the open source ILS world. It's been around since 1999, it's rock solid, and it has an enormous global user community. Smaller colleges, public libraries, international libraries. Koha is everywhere. Folio is newer and more ambitious. It's designed as a true LSP, cloud native, modular, extensible. The App Store model means a library can turn on exactly the modules it needs. Some major universities, including Cornell and Duke, have adopted it. It's still maturing in some areas, but it has serious institutional backing. The real question for any library considering open source is not is it free, but what is our total cost of ownership and do we have the organizational capacity to run this well? Here is a question. If libraries use different systems from different vendors, how do those systems talk to each other? That is what this slide is about. Standards are the answer. They are agreements, often developed by NISO, the National Information Standards Organization, about how data should be formatted and exchanged so that systems from different vendors can work together. Z39.50 is the old school search protocol. It lets one library system query another's database directly. Still used for copy cataloging, when a cataloger wants to pull an existing record from OCLC rather than create one from scratch. OAIPMH is how repositories share metadata. If you have ever used a subject aggregator that pulls together records from dozens of institutional repositories, OAIPMH is probably how the metadata got there. Counter and Sushi we already covered. Usage statistics. NCIP handles circulation data exchange, which is critical for interlibrary loan. And then there are REST APIs. This is the modern approach. Instead of relying on a specific protocol, platforms expose APIs that let developers build custom integrations, apps, and workflows. Exlibris Alma has an extensive API suite. Folio is built on microservices with APIs throughout. Libraries are increasingly using these to build custom tools on top of their platforms. You do not need to know how to write code to work with APIs, but you do need to understand what they make possible and be able to talk to your IT colleagues about them. At some point in your career, you will likely be part of a conversation about selecting, replacing, or migrating to a new library system. It might be as a decision maker or as someone whose input is being sought. Either way, you want to know how to think about it. The 5-step framework on this slide is not invented here. It reflects standard professional practice in the field. Needs assessment first. You cannot evaluate systems until you know what you actually need. That means talking to everyone: reference librarians, catalogers, circulation staff, IT, and yes, users. Document what is broken or inadequate in your current system. Market research next. Breeding's Library Systems Report is your starting point. Attend conference sessions. Talk to peer institutions. Request demos. This is where librarytechnology.org is invaluable. You can see exactly which institutions are using which systems. Then the RFP, Request for Proposal. This formalizes your requirements and asks vendors to respond. A good RFP forces you to articulate what you need clearly enough that you can compare vendor responses against the same criteria. Pilot testing is critical and often skipped. Get real staff working with real data in a demo or sandbox environment. Problems that are invisible in a sales presentation become obvious in a pilot. And finally, the decision and migration. This is where TCO, total cost of ownership, analysis lives. The license fee is just one line item. Training, data migration, ongoing support, integration work, all of that has to be factored in. Let's close the content portion of this lecture by looking forward a little. These are the 4 trends I think matter most right now for people entering academic librarianship. Cloud first is already the dominant direction. Most new library system implementations are cloud-hosted SaaS. This shifts the IT burden away from local teams, which is appealing for libraries with limited technical staff, but it also means you are dependent on a vendor's infrastructure and uptime. AI is moving fast. We are already seeing AI-assisted metadata generation, where a system can suggest subject headings or classification numbers based on full text analysis. Recommendation engines, predictive analytics for collection decisions, chatbot reference, these are either here or very close. The question for librarians is not whether to engage with AI, but how to evaluate it critically and use it ethically. BibFrame is the Library of Congress initiative to replace MARC with a linked data model. MARC has been the backbone of library cataloging for over 50 years, but it was designed for a world of card catalogs. Beeb Frame describes bibliographic relationships using linked data principles, the same technology that powers the semantic web. This is a longer term shift, but it is real and it is coming. And finally, microservices and APIs are changing how libraries build their technology stacks. Instead of buying one monolithic system that does everything, libraries can assemble workflows from modular services connected by APIs. Folio is built on this model. It means more flexibility, but also more complexity. Okay, let's land this plane. 5 things I want you to walk away with this week. 1. The shift from ILS to LSP is not just a technology upgrade. It reflects a fundamental change in what academic libraries need to manage and how they need to manage it. Print-only systems for print plus electronic realities do not work. 2. Discovery systems are the user's primary interface with the library. Understanding their scope, their limitations, and their biases is core professional knowledge. 3. Interoperability standards are what hold the ecosystem together. Counter, NCIP, OAI-PMH, APIs. These are not just technical acronyms. They are the agreements that allow libraries to function across vendor systems and institutional boundaries. 4. System selection is a strategic decision. It requires stakeholder input, careful evaluation, and honest total cost of ownership analysis. Rushing it creates problems that last a decade. 5. This field is moving. AI, linked data, microservices, the platforms you will work with 5 years from now will be meaningfully different from what exists today. Build the habit of staying current through Breeding's reports, Code4Lib, and the Educus Horizon report.